Well, automating success followers and listeners, I have another great show lined up for you today. I have Peter Goldstein on the show today, and he is actually in Italy right now, from what I just found out. So it's kind of cool. I always enjoy knowing the reach and expanse we have for people around the world. And I'm going to introduce Peter to everyone so you understand why you should definitely tune in to this episode and learn everything you can from this episode. So Peter is a seasoned entrepreneur. He's a capital markets expert and investor with over 35 years of diverse international business experience. Throughout Peter's career, he's held pivotal roles, including CEO, chairman, investment banker, founder, board member, investor, and advisor to public, private, and emerging growth companies. Peter's achievements span capital markets, specializing in equity financing, strategic planning, and transaction structuring. These include numerous successful IPOs, M&A uplistings, reverse merger transactions, private placements, and crowdfunding campaigns. He's founded Exchange Listings LLC, dedicated to facilitating growth companies' listings on esteemed exchanges like the NASDAQ, the NYSE, and EMIS Capital, specializing boutique fund investing in global small and micro-cap pre-IPO growth companies. So, Peter, how did I do? And how did my team do in doing some research on your background and history?
Well done, Joe. It's always interesting to hear someone else describe, your background professionally, and that was right on point. And thanks for having me, and great to be connecting with you and with the audience and all the listeners.
Yeah. So for my audience, you have to realize, for me, and you guys that listen know that I always have some unique people. And Peter's someone that I'm hoping I can kind of get into maybe a little bit of introduction, almost free advice, because he's kind of checking a box for something that even myself, I'm starting to realize I might have to really get to know a guy like Peter, right? So, we all reach points in our startups and growth where you do as much as you can on your own, and you start to realize, okay, maybe it's time to start to scale it up. So just so you know, Peter, and be a little selfish on this one too, because I want to learn whatever I can from a guy like you with that type of background. So to kind of get started, tell us kind of about your journey that's taken you on. I mean, you've had a lot of things in your background, CEO, investments, stuff like that. So kind of just take us down the journey of 35 years, if you could.
Yeah, Joe, it's been a journey is a great word because it really describes the evolution as an entrepreneur. What you were saying just now about, we reach points where we're ready for what's next. And then, I've been very, I think, fortunate that the right people have shown up at the right time in helping me advance myself, both professionally and personally. So my career started as an entrepreneur. I felt like I was born entrepreneur, right? Like, I think you and many other listeners, I see you smiling, just have that kind of innate, natural drive inside of us that defines a lot of who we are. And I never really knew exactly where I would go with that, but I did always know I would wanted to be in business for myself. So I started a career in food and beverage, and quickly learned that I didn't want to be in the hospitality industry for my entire career, given, the 7 days and long hours and, kind of lifestyle that came with that. And at 24, I had an opportunity brought to me by somebody I was working with in New York City at one of the most prominent restaurants in the world then, called the Rainbow Room. And I left that job at the age of 23, was the chief of operations, and started my first business. And that was in the food industry, a natural segue, in food distribution in New York City. And I grew that business successfully as a very bootstrapped entrepreneur, right? No formal training, no financial, wherewithal to do so, just my own drive and interest in building a business. And I had my first exit at 30. And that gave me a taste of what it was to be a founder, to scale, to grow, and to really understand, the requirements that are what we would consider the entrepreneurial drive for success. And then I took that and I leveraged that into working with companies for the last 30 some odd years. I'm 61 now. So I've had, close to 4 decades worth of entrepreneurial experience. And once I got a flavor that what I had done, I can start to help and educate and apply to others. So since then, I founded many of my own companies, work with companies all over the world in different capacities, with a focus on being able to scale, being able to finance, and being able to create liquidity events for the companies of either my own or those that I was involved in.
Yeah, it's so funny. You said through your experience or journey that you've always kind of been able to find people or be in the right place at the right time, maybe. And it's weird because this podcast to me, literally the timing of us doing this, it's like the right place and the right time for me, right? It's like I think one of the things that people that listen to this show, and most people that listen are people like myself, you know, as an entrepreneur, it's like, and I don't know if you can comment on this, like I feel like every business I've built, it almost feels like almost like a child, right? I mean, it's not living, but it is, right? It's constantly changing and evolving. And sometimes I feel like maybe as an entrepreneur, sometimes we want to hold on to it because it's like we never want to do the exit. So you brought up you had your first exit at 30, which is amazing. You said you're 61, I'm 45. And that's some of the stuff right now where I'm starting to try to figure out, am I maybe ready to exit some of these beginning businesses that I started? And I get a lot of people from other entrepreneurs being like, "Yeah, but Joe, you could never work for somebody." And the reality is, I think, and I want to hear this so as a lead up to your next question. You get a lot of that advice, but when you exited, did you ever feel like you were working for someone? Because you're never going to lose the entrepreneurial spirit, right? So I'm just interested to hear your opinion on when that exit happened.
Yeah, I was young, Joe, and I learned a lot. Um, an exit has different flavors and varieties, right? So that was really more of a synergistic merger between two industry participants, and it was designed for me to segue out of the business. So it was time for me, I felt, to move on to what was next, even though that wasn't defined. And I love your analogy about, creating a business is like, having another child. I've got two natural children, and I've had, many, many different businesses that I've involved with, and they are a living, breathing organism of sorts. They have a life of their own. They certainly have their needs. They're certainly quite demanding, and like being a father, I would say also can be incredibly rewarding. So, it's not as if, my kids are now in their 20s. I have an empty nest. They're both doing very well in the world. They're always going to be my children, but there's different stages of parenting, just like there is different stages of entrepreneurship. And I would say different stages of ownership and management of your entrepreneurial enterprise. And so I've learned that from different perspectives. And one of the biggest transitions that I've been a part of, my own evolution and working with other CEOs, is really transforming from a founder driven company to wider participation from others. And you're in automation. Your listeners are probably largely in automation. That's about process, right? It's about enhancing efficiency. It's about reducing costs. Evolution of business is very much the same to me. So what I do is work with entrepreneurs who are looking at one form of an exit strategy or liquidity event, which is an IPO. But there are many forms of liquidity events. There are many forms of exit strategies, and those have to really kind of be custom tailored to the wants, the needs, and the desires of the business, right? And then, looking at the different options that exist, for being able to access additional capital for growth, liquidity events, and utilizing, outside influence to help impact, what it is that you're really driven by, whether that's your purpose and or profit. We each have our own individual goals. And, what I've been able to be fortunate enough to do is to be on almost every side of that. Meaning I've been a founder, I've been a CEO, right? I've been part of a board, advisor, I've been an investor. and I work with companies that are going through different stages of, advancement towards liquidity event and giving up control and or total ownership of their baby, if you will, from which many of them as founders have given birth to.
Yeah. So, and it sounds like, I mean, this is, I want to make sure I let people know. So this is pretty much what has, I mean, so right now you're running exchange listings, right? LLC. So this is sounds like the passion, like everything you brought up. This is why you do it. Because I think a lot of times people, they make the mistake, and this is where I want to learn more about what differentiates exchange listings from other people's. Is like, there's people that approach me all the time and they're like, oh, we got some money, you want to do this. But it's like, I don't feel the passion sometimes from different people I've been approached by that I'm actually feeling from you on the show, right? It just right now in the short time we've talked. So explain like what it is that you're doing, trying to do that's different to make people like me comfortable with people like you.
I think it starts with authenticity, right? Like I'm really engaged, with the whole ecosystem of entrepreneurship. And then I have my niche and my subject matter expertise. And that's developed over time, Joe. When I, started in my career, I was building companies from the inside. And then I transitioned to, I started my own boutique investment bank. I had never been licensed before, but I knew I wanted to participate with integrity, in helping entrepreneurs to access capital and to be able to facilitate mergers and acquisitions and the growth of companies, and done properly. And so, being the entrepreneur that I am, I decided, okay, well, in order to do that properly, I'd done my research, I'd done my market intelligence, talked to the professionals in the community, and found out the best way to do that is to be licensed as a broker dealer. So that meant I could either go work for somebody, and to your point, once an entrepreneur, hard to go backwards. So I, from scratch, started my own boutique investment bank. And that led me into my career in the capital markets. And so there's a lot of depth that I've developed over the course of the many years, both, in successes and failures. But with that now is, the ability to help contribute to others, right? To add value, and to create value for myself. So the kind of the combination of, evolution of entrepreneur, my subject matter expertise and my passion. And then I would blend in, two other components: purpose and profit, right? Like I'm a capitalist.
Yep.
I'm here to drive, making money for myself and for others. And the way I look at it are all the stakeholders. If it's done right, everybody wins. And I think what you're sensing, is a bit of the purpose that I feel now that I've gathered a lot of knowledge, experience, failures, successes that I can embody and bring back, to help to guide and educate, and impact others, from the entrepreneurial perspective.
Yeah. Well, and I think passion drives purpose, right? And that's the other thing I get. Like I'm a very passionate person, and that's what drives me to be profitable because profit is scorekeeping to me. If I'm not profitable, I'm losing, right? And so like you can equate all of these different things and tie it into what we're passionate about, and it's being an entrepreneur. I mean, I've often said like I would never want to start a business that I couldn't speak passionately about because I would never be able to sell what I'm doing, you know? Um, and that's, I think, the one thing that differentiates a lot of successful entrepreneurs from unsuccessful ones is they see someone else's success and like, I can be successful in that business, but if they're not passionate about either the product in that business or the business itself, it's going to fail before it starts. And for me, I always like to align myself with people that share that same type of passion because I'm not going to feel guilty to call that person at 7 o'clock at night because they're probably sitting thinking about the same thing I am. So, in talking about your past and, you said you're almost 40 or 40 years of experience, you know, what are some what are some challenges you experienced when you were a startup or CEO that made you get into the line of work you are? Because I can tell you without before you even answer, like the hardest thing for me right now in the current state of my business is making the decision as to when to bring on outside investors or capital, right? And I'm going to assume this is something you've experienced in your past also, which is brings you to your present, obviously.
Yeah, I think by definition, an emerging growth company has strong capital requirements, right? So if you see as a leader that you're at that stage where there's more demand for, in your case, maybe your services, and there's a cap on where you currently are now with your resources, and you know that if you had additional capital and or additional human resources, you could take your business to the next level. Well, that's that kind of inflection point where, you're matching up then, your desire to grow, right? The market product or market service fit, and then the ability to leverage that with additional resources. And that's kind of that pinnacle. It's also a choice, right? Like, you could choose to be very comfortable where you are and satisfied with working within your current confines, with the results that you're getting and the success that you're having. And then there's the choice of, what, I want to take it to the next level. But in order to do so, I would need to bring in additional resources in capital and or in human resources. So, I look at that as more of where the goals and the objectives are for, the business owner, right? And that stage of inflection where, intuitively you've reached somewhat of a plateau. And then in order to go to the next level, something else is required, right? And then that can be defined. And in your case, I would say there's a third piece, which, is the automation, right? Is utilizing technology, but that requires capital as well. So,
Yes.
in the days done, right? Automation can transform an industry. Capital can help be transformational in its nature. And then you need the human expertise to apply to all that. So there's no one particular aspect. I think it's that somewhat that knowledge base that you would have as an owner, CEO, the driver of a business, and saying there's clear demand and need in the market that I could fulfill if I had additional resources of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Well, so you bring up some interesting thing. I mean, even the boutique bank and like investment group that you funded. I mean, I have to tell you, Peter, I've been saying to people like crazy, I got to figure out how to buy a bank. I have to figure out how to be a bank because the banks, traditional banks, and I'm being serious. Like it's so weird, like the parallels here in this podcast for me. And if you listen to some of my shows, it's not always how it goes. But the when I'm hearing what you're saying, because nobody wants to invest, so it's technology, right? But the problem is with technology, it's new. And then when you try to use a traditional bank, they don't understand. So then
Right.
they don't want to invest in it. It's like I put myself in an interesting position because I'm a distributor and dealer, and now I have a service model where I buy the robots and put them in subscription. So when I go to a traditional bank, Peter, they're like, "Well, you can't buy from yourself," and I'm like, "Why not? I'm buying cheaper than I would buy if it wasn't from myself." And they just don't understand. So then I'm like, okay, I gotta start something that understands this or work with someone like you that could actually hear it, see the vision, see its technology. And then for my listeners in technology, like my first company was the landscape company. And my belief is with just traditional landscaping, it's almost like outdoor artwork. So I was never as concerned about bringing on capital or working with someone like yourself because people buy from people, and I felt people would use my team and I could be in that area. And like you said earlier, be comfortable in what we built in that 90-mile radius. But with technology, I also know if I don't accelerate my growth, someone will look what I'm already doing, they'll put the capital together and they'll do it themselves. So that's the one thing that happens with technology and automation is if you wait too long, you miss your moment. And my thing is I don't want to miss the moment that I've created already with my team, you know. So do you have anything to expand on that, or you think I hit it in a nutshell, like for like
Uh,
other people you work with?
yeah, I think you hit it. And to me, what I hear is that you want to make sure that you are aligned with the strategic goals that you have and the market opportunity, and not missing something that you see as the next step or the next stage of growth. And so then you would say, okay, Joe, that's great. Then what are your options? Traditional bank, you've already nailed it. It's probably not likely that you're going to get the financing that you would want to be able to expand that way from traditional commercial bank. So then there are all the alternatives. And those alternatives would be, there's always friends and family around to financing. It's where I've started, and usually use that to springboard to, additional rounds of capital. Nowadays, capital is very tight in all circles, whether that's venture capital, whether that's private equity, whether it's the institutional capital that I do or specialized kind of financing. Crowdfunding is equity crowd and debt crowdfunding are now optionalities that exist. So, it's really about understanding then and packaging what it is that you have in a way that you can communicate that to potential suitors. And those suitors would be investors who would be looking then at the accuracy in, your forecasting, right? In your financial model, right? In your assumptions, in the key metrics and the market opportunity. And then putting that together in such a way, in a form that you benefit, and it's clearly demonstrated what that return on investment would be, so that the investor knows what they're participating in, what they're buying, and what their anticipated rate of return could be.
Yeah. Okay. So here, let's go through a little, just a thing together, and hopefully you don't mind me doing this. But so, company like mine, and there's a lot of listeners that are basically people like me. So, company like mine, $2.5 million in robotics as a service. I buy the robots, I put them out, monthly recurring revenue, and 5-year contracts. Right? So, I've been told by people, okay, you should talk to private equity. Well, it's too small for private equity. Yeah. Like, that's what's crazy, that the market is the market's valued at almost $100 billion when it counts, but it's so early. We're not even to the adoption curve in this space yet, So you look at it and you say, okay, not big enough yet. Then they bring up venture capital. Well, my own company's been my own venture capital. I already invested in my own company. So that stage I've already kind of hit. So then I've even had people say, dude, you should do some sort of an IPO, or you should just go public, because you'd be fine. But a guy like me, if I'll land the plane here, Peter, a guy like me, I've never been in charge of a publicly traded company. I know how to run my private company. So my biggest trepidation is the day I have to answer to investors, right? It's like, because right now I can pivot quickly. So I guess my question would be, being that you've got background in IPOs and all this stuff, let's say I want to go the IPO route, or people listening that are like me want to go that route. What's the size of the company you take it to get there before you actually do
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Joe. So, where you are, we'll use your kind of case study. It's like a tweener, right? It's like, when your kids are not yet, they're still in that formation, that teen stage, that awkward stage of, well, where do we sit? And the size of your business, like you said, it's a little too small for PE, a little too small for private equity. You may be better suited for angel investors or revenue-based financing, maybe some strategic partnerships with, tech companies or robotic suppliers. And then, of course, what you've already been doing, which is bootstrapping and using your own capital to get there. If a company like yours wanted to go public, you're also at this stage a little small. And let me define and also educate you and the listeners. So there's a myth around Wall Street. And the myth is that you need to be a unicorn in order to go public. It's just not true. So I wrote a book on this topic. It's called The Entrepreneur's IPO. And it really is a practical guide to being able to understand how to take your own company public. I did it like I was in the seat of Joe. I didn't have the experience, the background. And as an entrepreneur, I was a pioneer in forged territory. And now I've taken all those lessons that I've learned in doing this repeatedly and working with others all over the globe, and brought that into a very kind of simplified, clear, pragmatic, educational book that can really guide entrepreneurs who one day may want to do that. And later on, we'll talk about the book, and I'm even happy to offer that to the listeners. But here are some of the parameters. A microcap company, by definition, is $30 million in market cap, okay, to $100 million. So what does that mean? It's not valuation, it's the market capitalization of the company. And how is that determined? That's determined by taking the value of a share. Let's just use a hypothetical, $5 a share. That's been determined by the market and by investment rounds and quantified by capital that would be coming in or will come in, times the number of shares that you have in the company. So typically when a company is going public, they have a minimum of 10 million shares issued and outstanding. At $5, you now have a $50 million market capitalization. So how do you get there? Well, that's typically done by a series of, defined metrics that are put together by your historical financial performance, your projected financials, and, cash flow models that are put together. Sometimes that'll be put together in utilization with, other financial tools and metrics. But to keep the conversation simple for today, company needs to have a minimum of a $30 million market cap to be able to really have enough size and substance to go public. And that could be by marker, maybe 10 million in revenue, depending on the sector, right? You're talking about robotics and AI and automation, that usually demands a higher valuation or multiple in the market. But just to give some markers out there, what I look for, minimum of 10 million in revenue, profitable, and $1 million in capital or access to that $1 million of capital to help cover the costs of going public. Does that help, Joe?
Awesome. That helps a ton. I mean, and it's actually, this is the thing about where I'm at with my business, and many people that listen. I mean, most people that I have on, Peter, are startup, but they make the equipment. Where I'm different. I buy. I don't care who makes the robot. The irony for me, and you brought up like getting manufacturers help me with funding, and I'll say it openly on this podcast. The manufacturers are here to put in perspective for us. We are over 50%. I'm going to leave the brands out so they don't get mad at me, but we're over 50% of a particular brand's sales. We're a fifth of another brand's. We're almost 95% of another brand's that bring their product into this country. And I'm the importer of a ball wash management system that comes from the UK. And it's the only system in the United States. So what's funny is the manufacturers, it's like they know they need a robotics as a service, like full service model to keep their robots running. But they're almost too big for their own good. They're all publicly traded companies, and they are like kind of like, instead of wanting to invest in a company like mine, they want me to just work for them all the time. They're like, well, I'll tell you, we'll absorb you, and then you work for us. And it's like, I don't want to work for you. I want it to be my company. So it sounds like you've given me kind of a roadmap to say, okay, I've got to try to figure out how to bring on some investment, get it up to that 30, 35 million, which at the rate we're growing will really not be that hard. I mean, every state I go into, it takes me about two years to grow 1 million in each state, so it sounds like a couple of years from now, I could be talking to you about how I do an IPO if I wanted to go public. But then the thing is, it's so profitable. I don't know. Now, here's my next question, because sometimes I look at it, and once it gets cooking, once I pay off the capital of the robots, it's profitable enough. I don't know that I need to continue to be publicly traded to generate the background revenue to grow, because once the robots pay themselves off, I become more profitable. Is there ever a model that's better? Like, is there better things to go public versus stay private and just keep on working the PE side? Do you have any insight on that?
Pros and cons, Joe, right? Choose your chocolate or vanilla or a swirl or strawberry, whatever your flavor is. I'm in Italy right now, so we'll talk gelato, as opposed to ice cream. But here's where I start. This is not a casual, oh, let me do this for a while and then, change my mind, go in a different direction. It's a commitment. And any entrepreneur who's thinking about this, anybody that I'm working with, that's where we start. Are you fully committed? Because this is not for, the casual approach to, let me put my toes in the water. There are sharp elbows and sharp edges in the capital markets, and it's tough. So I normally start with commitment and then the why. Why would you want to do this? It's really difficult and challenging. And it's one of the most rewarding things, I've ever been a part of. So, there's this whole duality that goes on. And like anything else in life, you need to make a choice. You need to be really committed to the choice that you're making, and know that this is not an easy road. And then work with a team that has expertise to help you create a real executable plan. And to one of your points, we start with companies 12, 18, 24 months out from when they could even consider having a symbol and being traded. It takes a lot of time to educate the CEO, the C-suite, right, to transition and then to prepare. And it's an entire process that, for especially for someone who's never done it before, needs to take time to be able to kind of get comfortable in that seat, to be sure that everything is set up for success, not just to get to the listing, but to then be sustainable as a public company. And there really are two different parts of the journey. Most people, myself included, and even projects that I've been involved in, get hyper focused on getting to the listing and then forget about the fact that, well, once you reach that, now you've got to run a public company. And I give you
Yeah.
the analogy, Joe, it's like running two different businesses, right? So, you've got your operations, your day to day, what you're doing now as a CEO, as probably most of us are used to as a private company owner. Then you flip a switch, and now you're doing that as public company CEO, and the requirements to the reporting, to the governance, right, to ongoing stakeholders. It is a secondary business. So this is not just a let me go get some capital, let me grow my business, right? It's complex, it's chaotic. There's a lot of risk, right? So what we look for are to overcome those pitfalls. And what we started with was, hey, let me make sure I educate people so that they're aware of what's possible. Then the pitfalls are people aren't prepared, they're not educated, they can't navigate the complexity of the financial, the regulatory, the legal complexities, and then access underwriters, capital, know how to interface, and then properly measure and structure and price an IPO. And whether it's, if any of you are ever going to do that, whether it's me or somebody else, find somebody who you want to work with, who has that expertise, that can be your partner through the process. And that's why I created Exchange Listing. I did it, Joe, the hard way. I did it on my own without that trusted advisor. I had lawyers, I had bankers, I paid everybody all kinds of crazy amount of money in fees. I learned most of it the hard way. And I've had successes and failures there. So now what I see, just like what you see with your, niche inside of the robotic side and the automation, is you see the opportunity and the market fit. Well, I couldn't find anybody doing what I was doing with Exchange Listing after 20 some odd years in the industry. And then I decided to create this as a value oriented service to be able to provide for entrepreneurs who want to go through this process, are committed, and have the desire to go ring the bell of the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange.
Peter, to show how aligned we are, and like, I mean, listen, I mean, as we're talking about this, I'm just, it's like my question was here, just so the listener can know, and you answered two questions in a row without me even asking them. Was what criteria to use to select the companies you work with in Exchange Listing? And then the next question I had was how do you ensure that the companies you work for and you position meet their listing funding objectives efficiently? And you pretty much answered the question before I asked, because
Love it.
and it's proving that like you know the questions people like myself are going to have, because that's the question, right? Like nobody wants to become Steve Jobs and get fired out of his own company once he went public, right? I mean, I literally, to tell you, Peter, about a little bit of an evolution for me. I mean, I've got people in my ear telling me I should franchise, and I have people in my ear telling me I should go pee. I have some people, my own brother, being like, dude, you're so niche Peter, we're in some of the best clubs in the world. I mean, I've got golf clubs in Florida that are $1 million membership clubs for golfers to golf, and our systems are in their clubs, right? So my brother's like, screw it, man. Like, just stay at those clubs. You don't need any of it. But there is a purpose that I have, and the purpose is to create opportunity for all the people that are doing this right now. Like that's part of the purpose is not to just have myself comfortable, but to change the world as we see it, as it runs. Like I know the stuff we do is more efficient. It's better for the golfer because we can mow at night. It's better for the environment because it's all electric. I know the mandates that are coming in the United States. I know the equipment that's coming. So it's like if it's going to happen, why not with my company? And so those are the reasons. And you are right. It's like there's a part of me why I am interested in this type of thing is I think all entrepreneurs, we are constant learners. We're lifetime learners. You're a great example of it. And it's like it's almost becoming easy for me to do startups. Like I mean, I have 6 businesses, they all have over $1 million. It's like I've already beaten those odds. I can start up a company like I can probably be on one of those shows where they put you someplace with $500 and start a business. I could do that. So now, what haven't I done? I haven't rung a bell. I haven't run a publicly traded company, and it's kind of like I feel that itch. It's like a new thing to learn. So anyways, I just wanted to say, like, I think it was so awesome how you took me down that, to take the listeners down. So, how do you foresee? So to go back to you a little bit on this, what are some trends that you're seeing in capital markets for these small micro cap companies? I mean, you said capital is kind of hard to get right now, right? So like, is you want to elaborate on the trends or what you see?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Joe. It's a complex time in the world, right? You got multiple wars going on, you got geopolitical issues, you got inflation, you've got, our own political challenges in this country. All of that impacts capital. And there is a really a significant amount of capital on the sidelines, maybe more than I've ever seen in my career because of the uncertainty in the world. And so that's affected the IPO market. To put some context around it, 3 years ago in 2021, we had one of the best IPO markets in 20 some odd years. Roll the tape forward, we're in one of the worst IPO markets in 30 years. And by worst, by size, volume, and the amount of capital flowing in at the valuations. So this is a cycle, Joe. It's just part of the reality of the cycles of the capital markets and of let's call macroeconomic impact. So companies are still going public. We're working with them. We're raising them capital. Some statistics to help give data because I like data. In the first 6 months of this year, there were 61 small cap and micro cap IPOs that we're doing. I would say half of those were foreign. So those are companies coming out of foreign venues, predominantly the Southeast Asia, where I just visited, accessing capital and liquidity here in America. So they're based in other parts of the world, but they're listing here in the US. And the average size of those small cap and micro cap IPOs is $6 million raised at the time of the offering, as opposed to $15 million back in 2021 as a minimum, as an average for those companies. So, you can tell then just by that statistics, our market is off by, 40, 50%. And that's largely due to the uncertainty that capital has in getting a return on their investment. So the current environment is not necessarily conducive for the best timing. There is a significant pipeline built up and stacked up waiting for that window to open. And the advice that I'm giving to entrepreneurs who are committed to going public is get ready, be prepared. Because when the window opens, when the cycle opens, and it will, it's just a function of time. And I think some certainty, coming out of the current, challenges that we have, in the world, when that money the money needs to flow, right?
Mhm.
It's got to
Well,
move.
and you openly said if a company wants to do this, it's going to take them a couple of years. I mean, I'm assuming their accounting practices have to change, their the way they forecast, all the ways that they're going to do this are going to change anyways, and there's a learning curve to that. So if you can predict the flow and the ebbs and flows of the market, you can actually be learning in the ebb, so you're ready in the flow.
Well said, Joe. You're a fast study, and no crystal ball here, because if I had one, I'd probably be on some island somewhere, having a cocktail and not be sitting here on this podcast with you. But
Well, but you
you know,
are in Italy. Let's
uh,
just say
I,
you're not doing too bad. But anyways, go
I'm not complaining. My crystal ball works, but not perfectly, right? And
ahead.
but those building blocks you were talking about are like anything else. If you were an athlete, it's like being game ready. You got to put in the time. You got to put in the practice. You got to put in the reps. So when you do get tapped, you're ready to go. And it's the same thing here. You can't turn you know going public is not like a high performance, quick turning, machine. You've got to take time to turn it and prepare. So the building blocks for a successful IPO execution are your business has to be ready. As you said, you have to be audit ready, which is a minimum of a 2-year financial audit. You have to have diligence, all of your legal documentation, everything, your taxes, right? All of your history has to be packaged and put together in a diligence readiness process. You have to get prepared for filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission, right? We've got to identify an investment banker to partner with. We've got to get your organization ready. We've got to bolster up your team. You've got to look at bringing on a board and having corporate governance and committees. These things just don't happen overnight, Joe, right? So those aspects, the way I'm looking at this now is get game ready. Because if you're in a position, and let's just take your scenario, that in the next 6, 9, 12 months, you said, okay, Peter, I know I'm going to hit my revenue streams. I'm going to be of the size and have that momentum that I'll want to take the company out, and I'm committed to doing that. Start now, because when things change in the markets, you want to be able to take advantage of that. I've seen these cycles over and over. I've been on the upside and I've been on the downside. I've made millions and I've lost millions in those scenarios. And honestly, I got crushed during the Great Recession. So having tenure of watching market cycles and then being on both the inside and the outside of that, preparation, ability to execute is key.
Yes. Well, and it's like that's the thing that I've realized with all of this is you like for me, I just have to figure out what's most comfortable to grow. Because I know the company's going to grow, and I know we're going in all these different states, and whether or not I do it with an IPO or investors, I have to report all of this to someone, you know. So you might as well get it right anyways. I mean, it doesn't hurt you to get it right. So let's say it was my company, like how do you partner with people like myself? Like how does the process get started? It, how does that go?
Yeah, so I want to touch on something you said, and then I'll talk about my model. So something that you said is really important for you and for listeners. So even before you could say, Pete, I'm committed, I'm ready. There's another period between here and there, and starting to get your mindset around the practices that go along with being public are of tremendous value. What do I mean? So getting your reporting to the point where you have regular monthly recaps, quarterly reporting, you're tracking all of your key metrics, right? Putting into place governance, starting to act like an organization that is responsible to outside stakeholders. That by itself, Joe, will bring value to the way you operate, like point in hand. Then is, okay, you would be ready for the next level and the next level and the next level. But you don't have to commit now. Whether you're doing a financing, an IPO, a trade sale, merger, acquisition, a lot of those steps are the same no matter what. You still have to walk from step to step. You're going to go service a golf course. There's step to step to step before you can even get your equipment onto the lawn, right? So,
Yeah.
very similar here. I work in a very unique way because I want to take an equity position with you to be a partner. I'm not looking to do a transaction. So we align with the company. We have to be confident and committed that we can get you to the point of being publicly listed, or I won't take on the project. That's my approach. And it's very, very entrepreneurial in the sense that I want to be a partner. I want to show that I have to perform to be able to earn my equity position. So our business model is based on a monthly retainer, which is different on the size and scope of the business that we work with and how many man hours and what's required to be able to, kind of work with the company based on the stage of development, size, complexity, so on. And then the rest of everything is based on performance. So I make enough money to cover my overhead, keep the lights on, keep everything moving in the business while I'm working towards the same liquidity event with you. And then I hold a position of equity in the way of common stock and warrants that are earned upon the listing. And we get a bonus and we get rewards, so on and so on. But if we don't get you to the dance, we don't enjoy the benefits, right? So I'm unique. Typically, you could hire a lawyer. You'll pay a lawyer an hourly rate. You'll pay them a monthly retainer. They'll work with you in the legal aspects. You could hire a banker. You could hire an investment banker. You could bring on advisors. There's a lot of different ways to get there. I've just created a solution that I believe works the best for the entrepreneurs that I work with and the best for me. So, free of charge is the book. That one's easy. And it lays all this out, Joe. It takes you through, Wall Street is built on smoke and mirrors, right? I don't compete with Goldman's and NJP and all the big, I don't compete with any of the bankers. We bring companies into the ecosystem. So I want to give that knowledge away. And so the book just basically is very simple, pragmatic, takes all those smoke and mirrors that are on Wall Street. And I basically want to be able to give that to you and give that to the listeners on a digital copy because I can do that for free. It's easy to do. And then you'll get a better sense of what's required, what the team is that you want, what the steps are. And it really takes you from, hey, I have this vision to ringing the bell and beyond. And you could read it, I had one guy I spoke to this week when I was in Singapore. I met with him and I gave him a hand-signed copy of the book. He said, Pete, I was so excited. I took it home and I read it in the entire thing, during one day's sit, took me through the night and I was done. So it's 12 chapters. And in each chapter, Joe, there's a set of tips from two professionals. So as an example, we talk about the listing requirements. I brought in the head of capital markets and NASDAQ. So give me 3 or 4 tips. I did the same with the New York Stock Exchange, the same with the London Stock Exchange. You've got auditors, investment bankers, and industry professionals giving you pragmatic tips about, what it's like to go through the journey.
No, listen, if I had that book and if you sent me a digital copy, I would probably be the same type of guy because this is so fascinating to me. And your model is very fascinating because people approach me constantly and then they're like, yep, okay, we need this, we need this $50,000 or $100,000 retainer. And they start telling you all the stuff that they need. And then you're like, shit, if I had that type of money laying around, I wouldn't need you. Like that's the problem. So then I'm like, wait a minute now. Hold on a second. Maybe you're misunderstanding like where I'm at. Like I'm the type of guy, if I had 100 grand, I'm going to buy robots because robots make me 31% margin the day I put them out. And when they're paid off, they make me almost 67%. So it's like, I'll just keep doing that then. Eventually somebody's going to see me and say, here's some money, but it's not about, you brought up something earlier too. It's, what are you trying to get capital for and for what? It's like, it's not about an exit for me. It's about growth and it's about accelerating that growth to not be overtaken. That's what it comes down to for a guy like me, so that's why like IPO type thing is better because like what always scares me about PE money and maybe you can tell me I'm on the wrong tracks. I might be with this, but I'm always scared like, okay, if I get my company the size of PE and I get it, but then all of a sudden they change how I'm doing it. They want me to change it and it goes away. They just smother my baby. And that's a fear of mine. And I don't know why I feel more comfortable And if I'm going to raise capital in the IPO side, and maybe this is wrong, it's ill-guided, but I don't know why. I just feel like it's not like one fund is not going to shut me down. If there's a group of investors like we're not liking this anymore, they can get out, but maybe other people come back in. Am I wrong in that mindset?
I wouldn't say you're wrong, Joe. It's just different, right? You've got sets of controls. You've got a board, you've got governance. I mean, you may be able to maintain voting control. That's different. So yes, there's usually a more of a broader investor base. So the investor per se doesn't have the same control that you would get from a VC or private equity. So your assumption is right there. But there's a different set of accountabilities and responsibilities, and there are different risks inherent, market risks, performance risks, the valuation of the stock, market pressure, short selling. I could go on for days. So
Yeah,
there's right, there's no perfect fit here for any of this. It's really about choosing which is the best option for you. And I think what you said is really resonates with me. Is it's about growth
yeah.
and wanting to
Well,
be able.
and well, Peter, and sorry, and to me, it's like when I hear you bring up accountability and reporting, like, I mean, listen, we're all accountable. First of all, any entrepreneur is accountable to their customer. They're accountable to their people. They're accountable to the private banks and the typical lending agencies that we have. I mean, heck, I had 124 trucks. I'm accountable to Ford Motor Credit. It's like we're all accountable to something. You know what I'm saying? So when I hear you saying that, like, hey, I can be accountable to investors if I still have control to change it. My biggest fear always is how I stay accountable if I don't still have control, right? It- so yeah, that's like an important check mark for me, and I think that's where entrepreneurs sometimes get a bad rap. Is people are like, "Oh, you just need control." No, in order for me to be accountable, I need control. The minute
Yeah.
I don't have control, I can't satisfy everyone.
Well, and then, there's levels of control. And so, at any time in the public markets, you're issuing more shares, you're diluting your ownership. And with that, you're diluting control, right? So, you've heard
Yeah,
about the activist investors, right? And they can influence or challenge management decisions to, push for change that aren't aligned per se. The board, look at just what happened with Starbucks, right? The CEO was swapped, basically by the board. They brought in the Chipotle speaker and swapped them out. And you had the founder who was in and out of that role. So, again, control is something for me also as you evolve as a CEO, that it takes on different meaning. And then it's
good
really
point.
more about impact and about, stakeholders and about the things that you've spoken about that are important. One of the great benefits of being public is to use your stock as another currency to attract, reward, and motivate, employees. And then there's growth through acquisition. When I took one of my first companies public, we grew almost entirely through acquisition using a second currency called stock. So we attracted great people, we rewarded them with stock, and we used the same stock to go out and acquire more companies to help bolster up the size and the strength of the company. So, control comes with different definitions based upon the filter and the perspective you're looking at. So all this is like, it's great discussion, and there's it's like a healthy kind of dialogue and debate, right? Because when the day is done, uh, you can pick any one of these areas of wanting to bring in outside capital. We'll go back to the challenge. If you're going to open up and bring in outside capital and bring in outside resources, you're going to be giving up some control somewhere as a trade-off.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point too. I mean, right now, what I see as control is through the lens of a completely private company with bank money, right? So it's like I've never experienced anything outside that bubble. Doesn't mean I can't adapt outside the bubble, but right now, that's what I'm used to. That's where I live and breathe. You know,
Yeah, yeah, and that
yeah,
that that way of living and breathing is yours. When you go into, I'm going to call it a cultural shift, because I believe culture is critical to all entrepreneurial organizations. You're transitioning to being a public company, and often the culture and the decision making and the risk taking changes when there's an emphasis on governance, right? And there's an emphasis on controls, and then there's the pressure of, okay, I've got to hit my earnings and I've got to act and perform in a certain way. So those shifts can also impact the way, and that's where the founder then can often look at, I'll go back to the Starbucks. The founder may not be the right CEO to, grow the company as a public company. He might have been great as the visionary, as the driver, kind of as the hunter to take it to a certain level. So those are the self-awareness aspects that, really end up coming. And, it's part of growing. It's like you talked about earlier, as lifelong learning. I'm still in school at 61. I'm taking,
Yeah.
a program at probably the top business school in the world right now on corporate governance. And it never ends, because there's just new opportunities to learn, to grow, and to bring value to the stakeholders.
Yeah. So, I know I took this down a different lane than I normally would on my podcast because I could just relate to it personally. So I asked some of the questions that I did, but I want to make sure, I did a good job of allowing you to truly talk about what you do. And did I miss anything the way I did it? Like, is there anything else that the audience should know about you and what your organization does, that you want to basically make sure we get out in this time together?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Joe. It's been a great dialogue. I don't think you've missed anything. The one thing that I would add as an opportunity set is that with the fund that I have, we're opening it up to accredited investors. We had a very good year last year in one of the worst IPO markets, in 30 years. We had a 29% investor return. And the purpose of doing that, Joe, is that I see the same opportunity here for bringing in high net worth investors into what's typically been an institutionally dominated world, where the institutions control and make the money and are somewhat toxic in the way that they treat these small to medium sized companies. So I want to bring a new approach to pre-IPO, IPO, and emerging growth investing. So that is MS Capital. That's something that I would love to have people be aware of. It's also capital that we deploy for companies that we're working with who are looking for some capital while they're in the process of going public. So that's of value to both me and to the listeners. And then the last thing is, yeah, just to make sure that we give an opportunity for people to be able to get a copy of the book. I think the best way to do that is to connect with me on LinkedIn. I provide a lot of content, Joe, on LinkedIn around the things that I'm passionate about. So it's capital markets, it's entrepreneurship, and it's the category that I would call, self-leadership, which is really about the development of ourselves as individuals, and our personal growth alongside of our professional growth.
Wow, that's so amazing. And like I said, both very aligned because it's like that's one of the reasons I do this podcast is I love I can't imagine any better life for myself in the path I've taken. And I just want to inspire other people to take that same journey and walk that same path. And I think that that's exactly what you're doing.
Agreed.
And I'm so happy that we were able to do a show together today on this. Um, I always ask before I go, like, you're in Italy, do you live in Italy? Like, I always like to bring a little bit of a personal element in for people. So I got to tell you, I'm 50% Sicilian, so Italy, I've never been there, but I want to be. So why are you in Italy today, if you don't mind saying, and how often are you there?
I spend half my year, Joe, in Europe, and I'm actually a resident of the Netherlands over the last 5 years. That's something that's evolved first over business and then became lifestyle. And I'm here, working, but I'm also on vacation. I'm in I would say north central Italy. I'm in the Marca region, which is right next to Tuscany, but on the Adriatic seaside. And I'm just enjoying, summer life and good living, and all the things that come along with that.
Fantastic. Yeah, like I said, it's on my list to do. Actually, I was just researching I could become a citizen again there, because my family immigrated out legally, and so I actually am looking into doing that because I think it'd be just so cool. My grandma, who came from there, is still alive. Thankfully, she's 94. And so yeah, it's pretty cool journaling today. So, you know,
Yeah, it's a great journey to look at doing that, to connect with your ancestry, to connect with, the lineage, and also take benefits of the possibility of holding a dual passport. I've explored similar situations with my heritage, so I welcome that. And I really want to encourage any of your listeners and community, if you're looking to go down the path of the IPO side, feel free to reach out. Consider me a resource.
fantastic. All right. Well, with that, I think we're going to round this out. I think it was a great episode. I know I learned a ton, and I hope other people did. And yeah, like you said, reach out if you have any questions. Follow them on LinkedIn, and that's it. Have a great day, everybody.